end the new total, be it an increase or a decrease. So if you look at the bottom schedule, it then indicates the left-hand one is the original allocation that was presented in February. The adjustments one is the one that we're presenting today. And then the right-hand column shows the new total. Thanks. I'm then going to hand over to Bongani Daka. That's going to take us through the provincial allocations. Letsepo Pakis will take you through the local government allocations. So we'll be jumping between the allocations. Bongani, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Good morning, Chairperson, honorable members and colleagues. As Wendy indicated, I'll be taking you through the provincial changes. So given the disaster that happened around April 2022, money was moved between the disaster grants. This is to enable for the speedy response, and the Division of Revenue Act does allow for money to be moved between the disaster grants in the local and the provincial sphere. As given that magnitude, then 140 million was shifted from the provincial disaster response to the municipal component, and then the 120 million was shifted from the municipal emergency grant and to the provincial emergency housing grant to allow for that. And this was done through a gazette in August of 2022. So we are showing that change in the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, given the shift in the funding. And there are additional fundings that are made also as to be able to respond to these disasters, given that we are still in somewhere in the middle of the financial year. So in case any disasters do occur until the end of the financial year, there are resources available to respond to those. So in terms of the additions that have been made, 97 million is added to the provincial disaster response grant, and then 350 million is added to the provincial emergency housing grant. And also there are further additions that are made, and these are for the reconstruction and the rehabilitation of the infrastructure that was damaged mainly by the disaster in the April 2022. However, there was another floods that happened in December of 2021. So we are also catering for those. And in terms of the repair of the school infrastructure that was damaged in the Eastern Cape and the KZN, 117 million is added to the education infrastructure grant for that rehabilitation and the reconstruction of those schools. And then for the provincial roads in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and Northwest, and this is mainly due to the disaster of the April 2022, 1 billion is added for the repair of those roads that were damaged. And also for the KwaZulu-Natal, there are victims of the April floods that are still staying in the community centers. So for those people to be provided with food for children and adults, and to buy children formula and nappies, and also to pay for the social workers that are based in those centers, then 49 million is added to the provincial equitable share for the KwaZulu-Natal. So this money will be going to the social development department to provide protection and care for those people that are still in those community centers. So in terms of the other additions that have been made to the provincial government in here, the Department of Public Works, national government, reprioritized funding within their budget for the construction of the modular steel bridges. And this money has been added to the provincial roads maintenance grant, and the Department of Public Works indicated that it will only be allocated to 2 provinces, Eastern Cape and Limpopo, because of their readiness. So for Eastern Cape, they will be allocated 308 million and Limpopo 81 million. However, the committee will see that over the 2023 MTEF, there are additions, but we'll talk to that later when we are talking to the MTEF allocations, and those will accommodate other provinces. Thank you very much, Chairperson, and honorable members. I'll be handing over. Okay, just my one slide. The changes, overall changes. The 49 million addition to the equitable share, and for the conditional grants, it's 1.9 billion that is added. And then the negative for the provincial disaster response grant is just the net effect of the shift that was made to the municipal component and addition. Hence, the net effect is that and minus 48. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Over to you, Letsepa.
Thanks, Bongani. Good morning, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members. I will be taking you through the local government in their allocations. I think Bongani has already spoken to the conversion in terms of the disaster response grants, so I'm not going to repeat that. Suffice to say, these were meant to assist the two different spheres to respond to the demands that were put by the April floods. So funds here were following the function. And due to the depletion of those funds, there is additional allocation that have been made to cater for the disasters that might occur between now and the end of the municipal financial year. So 248 million has been added for those purposes. There is also additional funding that has also been made in terms of the municipal disaster recovery grant to assist the three provinces, Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape municipalities in dealing with the aftermath of these disasters. So there was 3 billion specifically to the municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal to assist in dealing with the April floods, and the same for Winnie Madikizela Mandela in the Eastern Cape, which is 34 million to deal with the April floods as well. And then there was also additional funding provided to the districts in the Western Cape. 290 million was allocated to assist those districts to deal with the December 21 floods that we experienced in those districts. And then assist honorable members, the city of Tekwini, to really respond to some of the, I think, challenges, in relocating the victims of the floods from the April floods. So 92 million has been added in one of the grants, which is the informal settlement upgrading grant for municipalities for the land that has been identified to then relocate those displaced flood victims. In this slide, honorable members, we deal with the rollovers as well as some of the reprioritization that took place in this budget, and $1 million has been rolled over in one of the grants, which is the
recording stopped,
which is the Integrated National Electrification Program. This is to assist fund 50 electrification connection in one of the municipalities. There is also a rollover of 15 million in one of the indirect grants, which is the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant for operational payments to assist in dealing with the issues that Mfuleni local municipality is experiencing in terms of the Vaal River pollution. Then there's a reprioritization of 100.
Recording in progress.
This, honorable members, is really to ensure that, where there are capacity challenges, there are ways in which these are mitigated to ensure that the project rollouts are not delayed as a result. So here, we've shifted 100 million from the neighborhood development grant, a direct component, to the indirect component to assist in the project preparation, the planning and the implementation. This is within the municipalities that have indicated some challenges in dealing with those. So these funds, honorable members, are not leaving the local government sphere, all those municipalities. They're merely being reprioritized within the same, so they will still be covering the same projects, or hoping that they would be completed in this financial year. So there is an agreement between our colleagues that manage the neighborhood development grant, as well as the municipalities, in terms of how this arrangement will take place. Honorable members, I'm not going to talk much to this slide because it really presents I think it just gives a picture of all the allocations and adjustments that I've spoken to. As you can see, in terms of the municipal disaster recovery, that's where the most funds have been added for the floods. And you also see in terms of the neighborhood development partnership grant, that shift there. So it's being shifted from the direct, but then it is added still in terms of the indirect transfers to local government as that 100 million down there. So that concludes the part of my presentation for now. Members, thank you very much.
Thank you. So it's back to me. I'm now going to talk about the actual bill and then the annexes to the bill and the changes that we need to make to conditional grant frameworks, and also where we need Parliament's support to make a specific recommendation to allow us to make certain changes to one conditional grant framework. So we're required, when we want to make any change to conditional grant frameworks, to consult Parliament in this regard. So basically what we're presenting here is the changes needed because of the adjustments made, which requires us to make changes to the conditional grant frameworks. So if I can just take you through each. Next slide, please. The first, Bongani took you through the provincial roads maintenance grant, and that specific money is going to be made available for rural bridges. So we're just adding a condition to allow for monitoring of the expenditure on the rural bridges. Similarly, Bongani presented and Letsepa presented on the additional monies that's made available for the floods and the disasters that happened. So this covers more than just the April floods. There's also provision, for example, for the Western Cape floods that happened earlier than the April floods. So that is also captured, and the conditional grant frameworks are amended to allow again for the monitoring of on the disaster spending where the disasters happened. And then there's also a change to the informal settlement upgrading partnership grant for municipalities. And again, it's got to do with the floods that happened and to make specific provision for that. And then there's also another change that we're making, and that's because the name of a municipality is changed in the Eastern Cape, and it's just to reflect the correct name of, or the new name, not the correct name, the new name of the municipality, and it's indicated on the bottom bullet. Then the next slide, please. This is the one where we would please request the committee to make a recommendation and actually allow us to make. What happened is that when we received a request from the National Disaster Management Centre, they based their submission to us from what they received from the KwaZulu-Natal Disaster Management Centre. And what the KwaZulu-Natal Disaster Management Centre did is they allocated the monies per district. And they did not look whether the district municipality or the local municipality is responsible for the provision of that service. So when we want to do the Gazette after the bill has been enacted, or the amendment bill has been enacted, we'll have the correct information. We will know which local municipalities, whose names we need to add, and which district municipalities' names we need to remove. But the monies remain exactly the same. It's got no impact on the actual allocation. But just to give us approval to do that correction, it will be very much appreciated. If I can then hand back to Bongani, that will take you. We're focusing now. We've finished with the adjustments budget, and we'll move over now to what's contained in the MTBPS. indicating what is expected for the 2023 MTF, both for provinces and municipalities. So Bongani, back to you again. Oops, the clauses as well. Yeah. Can I just take you through the next one as well? And this is basically, we've added one additional clause as well. We all know that we're trying to boost infrastructure investment, and to do that, and there's already provision in the Division of Revenue Act for local government or municipalities to pledge their conditional grants. A similar provision is not there for provinces. So a clause have just been added in the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill to allow for that. And if the committee can just consider that as well, this is a new provision that we've actually added to the legislation. And the intention is to make it a continual provision in future Division of Revenue Acts as well. Thanks. Now we move to the 2023 MTF allocations. Thanks.
Wendy, it's still your slides, but I'm happy to do them. I will come in for the provincial changes. Or should I continue from here?
You can continue. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of the 2023 division of revenue that was reflected in the medium-term policy statement, here we're just showing the overall changes that are happening, and we are showing that the growth rates are sort of, they're not, there's little to no growth rates, but what we are trying to show that is the annual average growth rate of 2% for the 2.8% for the provinces and 6% for local government. And the way that it's split between the equitable share and the conditional grants is such that for the provincial government, the equitable share is increasing by 22.4%, while the conditional grants by 4.3%. And then for local government, in terms of the equitable share, it's increasing by 7.8%, and then the conditional grants by 3.6%. And over the years, in terms of the growth to the local government, there has been like generous increases. So in terms of the changes to the provincial government over the 2023 medium-term framework, what we are showing is that there have been additional funding that is being made available. And this is over and above the previous additions that were made. And then for this, additions are going to go through the provincial equitable share. So that means provinces will determine how they will be using these funds. But what we were showing that is for the education sector, what is being added over the MTF is 20 billion. And this is to deal with the COE pressures that are within the sector. And then for the health sector, over the 2023 MTF, we are adding about 23.5 billion. And this is also to deal with the pressures that are within the sector, including the compensation of employees, and also there were service backlogs as a result of COVID, given that people did not want to go to the health facilities, and also that included people that are on antiretrovirals, and there's TB treatments, and also money is added for the laboratory services and other services, which include also medicine and medical supplies. Next slide, please. So in terms of the changes that have been made to the conditional grants, 1.6 billion is added to the early childhood development grant. As the committee is aware that in the previous budget, this function moved from social development to Department of Basic Education. So this money, what is meant for is to build the oversight and monitoring capacity within the Department of Basic Education, and also to improve on the service and expand the service of the early childhood development in provinces. And then there's also 1.5 billion that is added to the National School Nutrition Program. And this is to ensure that the feeding of nutritious meal continues every day for the 9 million learners that are benefiting from this. And then there is also 300 million that is added for the education infrastructure grant. And this is the carry through for the rehabilitation and reconstructions of schools that were damaged by the disaster. We made an addition in here, but there are also the carry through over the MTEF. So for the first year of the MTEF, there is that addition to cater for that. And then for the provincial roads maintenance grant, 7.1 billion is added, and this is for the refurbishment of the rural roads or provincial roads, pardon. Yes, to ensure that they get to be in the good condition. Next slide, please. And then here, what we are going to show are the changes that will be going through the conditional grants, but are the additions that are made through the budget facility for the infrastructure, which is part of the budget where projects can submit application for funding to ensure that they get funding, and a very strict criteria is applied for that. So some of the applications make it, some don't. So for this are those that were approved through that process. So in terms of the for the agri-cabs in the KwaZulu-Natal, 140 million is added, and this will go through the comprehensive agriculture support grant. And then for the Gauteng, which the program is called the Gauteng Schools Program, 1.5 billion is added. This is going to go through the education infrastructure grant, and this is for the construction of new and existing 35 schools to ensure that they comply to the minimum norms and standards. And then as indicated that when we were presenting on the in-year changes, we said that even over the MTEF, there is additional money for the rural bridges. 3.5 billion is being added, and it will go through the provincial roads maintenance grant. And at this point in time, we don't know which provinces are going to be benefiting, because in here it was
sorry, can I interrupt you? I just want to make sure that on the same slide, right? In 144 million, you said 140 million. Is it 144, 140? Because this is being recorded. And then let's read the numbers as written here, right? 3.7, I think you said 3.5, and here I'm having 3.7. Yeah, you get me? Hello?
Yes, Chair, my apologies, I read. For the comprehensive agriculture support program, it's 144 million. For the education infrastructure grant, it's 1.5 billion. And then for the provincial roads maintenance grant, it's 3.7 billion. And I was indicating that for this rural bridges, at this point in time, we don't know which provinces are going to be benefiting, but we expect that it will be more than the two that were mentioned for the in-year edition. And then apologies for those incorrect numbers, Chairperson and honorable members. And then in terms of the other project that was approved through the budget facility for infrastructure is for the Kucha SEZ. And the Eastern Cape is going to benefit indirectly as 1.8 billion is given to the Kucha for the implementation of the water project there. So it's the upgrading of the bulk infrastructure. And previously, for the previous rounds of approvals, the Limpopo Central Hospital was given money through the BFI. And what we are presenting here is the rescheduling of that funding. And this is to ensure that the cash flow aligns with the requirements of the project. So within the existing allocation, the baselines, the money that for the first year, we are going to reduce the allocation by 372 million. And then in the second year, there's an addition of 432 million. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll be handing over to Letsepa. Thanks, Chairperson and honorable members.
Thanks, Bongani, Smiak and honorable members. So what we're seeing in this slide is really some great news for local government. There is an additional 5.3 billion that has been added to the equitable share. And as we do every year, we do the costing and looking at the variables that inform the allocations to local government.
Recording stopped.
So here we looked at
Recording in progress.
the cost factors around the bulk electricity, water, and then we used inflation-related increases in terms of the sanitation as well as refuse removal. And then we also used the data from Stats SA in terms of the number of poor households within these municipalities. So that 5.3 billion is really going to assist us to fund 100%, of the poor households in our municipalities. So that is a billion. So 1 billion in the first year, and then it goes down to cater for the carry-through costs of what we're anticipating from the NERSA process in terms of the bulk electricity. And then there's that cash injection of 3.3 billion in the outer year of the MTF. We were still awaiting the new data that's going to come from the census that's going to come next year. And hopefully we can reform and refine the equitable share much further when we get to that point. There's also an additional allocation of 2.8 billion. So this follows from the 3 billion that has been added in the adjustments budget, but this is really for some of those long-term rehabilitation and reconstruction projects at the municipal level because of those the damage that has been caused by those floods. So we allocated 1.4 billion in the first year, and then the 1.4, another 1.4 in the middle year of the MTF, by which time we should have really wrapped up in terms of the repairs from the disaster that we experienced. There is also further prioritization in terms of the public transport network grant. The honorable members would know we in the past have indicated some of the challenges that we experienced in this grant in some of these municipalities that were then suspended from this grant. And while work is underway in terms of that, there is scope to further reprioritize within this grant. So 8 million has been reprioritized in the first year. In the second year of the MTF, and that grows to 13 million in the outer year. Really what this reprioritization is meant to do, it does indirectly benefit local government as well, because it is to fund the rollout of the single integrated ticketing system. So this is made to encourage users to use the different modes of public transport, simplify the system as well. In terms of the next slide, we're just talking additions now. This is exciting. So there's also additional funding for infrastructure that relates to the BFI. But now we have in the past indicated to the honorable members that these municipalities were successful in getting their projects funded from the BFI kitty. And as a result, there is constant communication between the municipalities and the Treasury in terms of assessing the ability, the challenges, and where there's a need to upscale in terms of delivery. Then that space has been created through this budget. As a result, in addition of 105 million has been added in the first year of the MTF. 40 million has been added in the middle year, while 316 million is added in the outer year of the public transport network grant. This is really to assist the city of Cape Town with its My City transport network project to keep up with the revised implementation plan there. So the municipality has managed to get the needed capacity. You know, now they are able to scale up in terms of delivery. Then there's a reduction of about 136 million in the first year of the MTF, and then we start bringing money into the system. So in the second year, we then start putting an additional million in 2014-15 in the regional bulk infrastructure. This is really to then assist George municipality, which is undertaking the potable water security remedial works project there to be able to manage its cash flow. So this is to ensure that monies are made available when they are needed. So this is a very progressive move that we're trying to build within the funding system, so that, you know, when municipalities discover that they have challenges in implementation, they can let us know so that we can then amend the budgets accordingly. This slide really speaks to the new window now, which is a window 6 that was created from the BFI. So these are really new allocations that are flowing through the direct grants in our system. So there's an addition there of 1 point. It's really 2 billion in the first year of the MTF. And the last chunk of that really goes to solve like a local municipality for the work they are doing in terms of the refurbishment and the renewal of those old water supply infrastructure. This is also to help bring in the private sector resources by ensuring that the bulk services that municipalities are responsible for, you know, are being provided, so that the private sector can then come and then further develop those areas. So really we're seeing quite a number of municipalities, you know, taking this route. There's also work that is being done in terms of a eThekwini Metropolitan Municipality, where the municipality is getting money there really to fund water and sanitation, all its functions really, to then also just create that space for the private sector to then bring its own development. So those partnerships are really encouraged through these allocations, and of course this allocation grows to 2.1 billion in the second year, really for those allocations, you know, in these 5 municipalities. Then it's 2.4 billion in the outer year of the MTF, and these funds are flowing through it's called the Urban Settlements Development Grant, as well as the ARPIC grants. So if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, honorable member, I think for transparency purposes, these are indirect allocations that will benefit these municipalities. So in one of the columns, we mentioned the benefiting municipalities, but these allocations are not necessarily allocations to municipalities. So these are to the water boards, you know, just to show that there is work that is being done to also address issues of the water supply across the value chain. So quite a number of these allocations will be provided to the water boards to then, you know, do the needed projects to then ensure that municipalities do not end up in a situation when there are water shortages, and when necessary also the Department of Water and Sanitation also does implement some of these projects.
Recording stopped.
Municipalities. So there, honorable members, there is 8.1 billion over the MTF that has been allocated through the regional park program, as well as the grant as well. That is my last slide. And the long, I think, is thank you very much, honorable members, and back to you and the manager.
Thank you, Chairperson. We're done with the presentation.
Mary Jane, is National Treasury done with the presentation?
Recording in progress.
Dr. Modisa will do the adjustment appropriation or
Please.
Nombulelo. Yeah, okay.
Sure. Thank you.
You are muted, Nombu. You are muted. Okay. You are still muted. We can't hear you. Or is it me?
We can hear you. We can hear you, Mary Jane. And let's have our videos on. Nombulela coming in.
Chairperson, I think Mpumi has issues with the speaker. Mpumi, you're still muted, Sisi. No, we still cannot hear you. We can see you. Chairperson, let me give Mpumi the chance to sort it out. I'm gonna start with the presentation, and then once she is sorted out with the mic, then she can take over.
Perfect.
Thanks, Chairperson. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honorable members. Can I ask Darren to allow me to share the screen, please? Thank you so much. So, Chairperson, basically our job today is not very complicated. We're just going to discuss the adjustment appropriation bill for 2022. So basically what we wanted to take the committee through, Chairperson, is looking at the parliamentary process that needs to be followed when we consider the adjustment appropriation bill. What are the amendments that have taken place since the appropriation bill was tabled at the time of the budget, the details of the spending for 22-23, especially looking at the unforeseen and unavoidable rollovers and such transactions. And then lastly, we're going to take the committee through the environments that require parliamentary shifting for Parliament to consider. So basically, Chairperson, what we are bringing to you is what we call an adjustments budget, and this adjustments budget basically is provided for things that are significant and unforeseen, especially looking at the economic and financial events. The second one is unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, basically that was recommended by a committee of cabinet, and this committee is chaired by the president. And then any other expenditure, Chairperson and honorable members, that links to section 16 of the PFMA, which would be emergency funding. We also have to look at any appropriation or money that has been appropriated by when the minister tabled the annual budget. So sometimes, Chairperson, the minister will table the budget, and then in his budget speech, he would mention specific items that we will be funding. So for example, for SOCs or for items where we're not ready to implement, he can announce those in his statement, and those will then be allocated in the adjustments budget. We're also looking at the shifts between and within votes. So basically sometimes, Chair and honorable members, the departments will surrender funds and you find that there's other departments that require additional funding. So during this process, we also look at how do we then move the money between the departments, but also some departments would want environments within their own baselines. So we usually consider those. As I said, the unspent funds, they also declare those unspent funds. And then finally, we also look at the rollovers from the previous year. We will be presenting those rollovers. So, Chairperson, as explained earlier, the Adjustments Appropriation Bill provides for increases or decreases to allocations that are set up in the Main Appropriation Act, which is what was tabled. We also look at the adjustments to the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, which has been presented by the IGR team. We also publish the adjusted estimate of national expenditure, but this is basically a memorandum or an explanatory memorandum to the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Chairperson, just quickly going through the parliamentary process, I think the committee is well aware of this, but basically the key thing is that we're looking at the revised fiscal framework, then the approval of the division of the revenue bill, and then the consideration on the appropriation. So basically, this is what the parliamentary process is all about. Chairperson, basically what then means is that the amendments on or to the appropriation bill, basically the committee, of course, on appropriation will process these amendments to the House, of course. But basically this just gives you the committee's responsibilities and what they need to consider if they change the proposals that are in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. But of course, the committee is aware of these, but basically is to indicate the reason for such amendments, to look at or demonstrate how these amendments will take into place the broad strategic properties, priorities and allocations, of course, but these are some of the list of issues that the committee will have to take into consideration if there are amendments to what have been provided. But of course, as I said, the committee does have the leeway to amend the proposals that the executive has put forward. So Chairperson and honorable members, can I check, Mpumi, are you back online?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. You can continue, Sisi.
Thank you so much. If you can still project for me. Apologies for that, and good morning, Chair and honorable members. My name is Nompumelelo Khatere from the Public Finance Division. So I'm going to be taking you through the main adjustments that are included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. So on this slide, Chair, we're showing the consolidated picture that summarizes all the adjustments as included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. So in the main, if we look at the net adjustments, the budget is increasing from what we tabled in the main budget in February by a net of about 13 billion. And then if we add the special appropriation bill, which is another 30 billion, then the total net increase to the budget is about 43 billion if we're looking at the consolidated budget, which also include the debt service costs. The main or the biggest adjustments are mainly in relation to unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, which is an allocation of about 6.3 billion. And then there was also an adjustment to the debt service costs by about 5.9 billion. And then we make provision for other adjustments such as your rollovers, self-financing, as well as the expenditure that was earmarked in the budget. And in the next few slides, Chair, I will take you through the specifics in terms of which departments have been allocated how much as part of the adjustments budget. You can go to the next slide, Mampo. And then on this slide, we're just showing the summarized picture, but this time in terms of economic classification. And then if we look at economic classification, the biggest adjustments were in relation to both interest and rent on land, which is basically providing for the debt service cost that I mentioned in the previous slide. And then we've also got adjustments at economic classification level in relation to goods and services, compensation of employees, as well as for transfers and subsidies. So the net, as I indicated in the previous slide, is an increase of about 43 billion to the budget. Next slide. Okay, so now getting into the specific adjustments that are included in the adjustments appropriation bill, starting with unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. So on this slide, Chair, maybe just to remind honorable members of what unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure is. Basically, that is expenditure that could not be anticipated at the time of the budget in February. So everything that hits the budget during the course of the financial year that was not budgeted for. And in terms of Treasury Regulation 6.6.1, it specifies which type of expenditure cannot be regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable. For example, spending that was known when the budget was finalized in February cannot be regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure, as well as spending increases that are due to either tariff adjustments or price increases as well cannot be regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable. And then lastly, spending to extend new services that are or to create new services can also not be regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. And if we look at the biggest allocations, in fact, all the allocations for unforeseen and unavoidable went towards helping those departments that were involved in managing the damage to the flooding that happened earlier in the year. So the biggest allocation is to the Department of Cooperative Governance. They receive about 3.3 billion, and that's for the municipal disaster recovery grant, as my colleagues mentioned earlier as well as about 247 million to replenish the municipal disaster response grant, and 96.9 million for the provincial disaster response grant. And then another big allocation went to transport, about 1.8 billion, and that was mainly to repair the provincial roads maintenance grant, specifically the disaster relief component. And then there's also about 454 million that went to SANRAL for the non-toll network capital, and then 364 million also to SANRAL, but this one is for damage to toll roads from the floods in KwaZulu-Natal. And then other allocation, well, the one that maybe was flood related would be the allocation to Parliament, which is about 118 million, and that was to rehabilitate the Parliament building because of the damage that was done by the fire, as well as the additional accommodation for Parliament members. So in total, Chair and honorable members, it's 6.4 billion that is allocated as unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. Next slide. And then in terms of funds that were earmarked in the 2022 budget speech, so this was announced in the budget speech, but because certain conditions had to be met before the funds could be allocated, and those conditions have now been met, hence we are allocating 500 million to the Department of Home Affairs for the Home Affairs digitization program. So this is the only adjustment that relates to funds that were earmarked in the 2022 budget speech. Next slide. And then the next adjustment, Chair, would be in relation to rollovers. Again, as a reminder for honorable members and the meeting participants. So rollovers are basically money that we roll over from the previous financial year into the current financial year, but that's specifically for funds that had been contracted at the end of the previous financial year, but could not be spent for various reasons. And the rollover process is essentially legislated in terms of Treasury Regulation 6.4, which also provides certain restrictions in terms of what can and cannot be rolled over. And Treasury Regulation 6.4 limits the maximum that we can roll over for goods and services, for example, to 5%. And also it prevents us from rolling over any money that is allocated for compensation of employees. And then in those instances where a department may want to roll over funds that were allocated for transfers and subsidies, in terms of Treasury Regulation 6.4, those funds can only be rolled over for the same purpose that they were originally allocated for. So a department cannot change the purpose of the rollover if it was for transfers and subsidies into something else. And then also important is that the funds that are unspent for payments for capital assets may only be rolled over to finalize projects that were ongoing in the previous financial year, or the acquisition of assets associated with that as well. Now, in terms of who the recipients of the rollover funds were, in the main, we've got, for example, Vote 29, which is the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. They received a rollover of about 231 million, and that was specifically to ensure that they are able to make payments to subsistence producers that were selected as part of phase 2 of the Presidential Employment Initiative, for which we provided funding in the 2021-22 financial year. And similarly with Vote 30, which is the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, they also received a rollover of 200 million, also linked to the Presidential Employment Initiative funding that was allocated last year. And in their case, specifically for the Broadband Access Fund. And then other rollover allocations, for example, went to Statistics South Africa. As we know, we had the census early this year, and therefore the rollover funds were to enable them to continue to remunerate the census field staff that assisted with the census in, I think it was in February this year. And then also we have allocations, for example, to the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. They received about 102 million, and 78 million of that was for the procurement of the server and storage to refresh infrastructure, laptops and desktops. And then 24 million was for the repatriation of South African citizens due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. So in total, the rollover that are included in the Adjustments Appropriation Bill amounts to 990.5 million. Next slide. Okay, so the next adjustment, Chair and Honorable Members, is shifting of funds between votes. During the adjustment budget process, we do also make provision for those instances where one department may want to shift money to another department for a specific purpose. And what we saw in this particular adjustment budget is that, for example, the biggest shift in funding was from the Department of Social Development. They shifted in total about 3.7 billion, and the 3.7 billion went to defense as well as to the Department of Public Enterprises. So the portion that went to defense was about 755 million, and those funds were shifted to cover a budget shortfall due to the extended deployment of the South African National Defence Force as part of the Operation Vikela in Mozambique. And then the largest portion, about 2.9 billion, went to the Department of Enterprises, and that was from to Transnet, specifically to repay the infrastructure that was damaged by flooding. And then the other adjustments, for example, the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, they shifted about 389 million in total. About 388 million of that went to the Department of Transport, and that was to specifically the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant to enable them to construct 24 bridges as part of the Welisizwe Rural Bridges Program. And then another portion of that went towards it went to, I think, yeah, for the Public Works and Infrastructure, it was mainly to the Department of Transport. And then other minor shifts that also occurred, for example, in the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, they received about 89.6 million, and that was from the Department of Agriculture and Land Reform, and that was to enable them to provide for the legal representation function being performed by Legal Aid South Africa. So the funds were to Legal Aid South Africa which is an entity within the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. So the net effect of the shifting of funds between votes will always be zero, because this is money that's moving from one department to the other. So therefore the net effect is zero, because there's no addition or subtraction in the money that is being allocated. Next slide. And then the next adjustment is self-financing. Also, just as a reminder, self-financing is basically spending that is financed from revenue that is derived from a department-specific activity. So there are those departments that as part of the ordinary course of their operations, they also charge for some of the services that they render to the citizens, and therefore they get revenue from those particular activities. And that revenue by law is supposed to be returned to the National Revenue Fund. And then as part of the adjustment budget process, then those departments can then apply for what we call self-financing, which is basically to ask for some of those funds to then be allocated back to them so that they can be able to continue to render those particular services, as an example. So the self-financing is approved as part of the adjustments budget, and then the funds are allocated then through the adjustments appropriation bill, and ultimately the Adjustments Appropriation Act once enacted into law. So what we see in 2022-23, the total self-financing that is allocated is about 1.6 billion. The largest portion of that is to the Departments of Home Affairs, as well as the Department of Defense. The Home Affairs allocation is mainly for them to defray the revenue generated from issuing the official documents. So whenever we go and renew our IDs as well as passports, we pay for that service, and then this is the money that then gets reallocated to the Department of Home Affairs so that they can continue rendering that service. And then in the case of the Department of Defense, they do some peace support operation to support the United Nations, and therefore the United Nations then allocates some money to them, which comes to them in the form of revenue, and as part of the adjustments budget, they then write to us in order to be able to retain some of those funds and be able to continue with those operations. So in their case, it's about 760 million that is allocated in that regard. And then other small allocations are, for example, about 20 million that is to the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And part of that is for the unitary payment in respect of the public-private partnership for shared campus accommodation. And then about 10.6 million is for expenditure towards the Industrial Development Corporation, specifically the Dirisano Construction Fund for projects that form part of the annual plan under the Voluntary Rebuild Program settlement agreement. And then we had minor allocations as well to correctional services. In the case of correctional services, this is the expenditure for offender gratuities. As we know, in some instances, the department makes use of offenders' labor for example, constructing or building tables and things like that. And then this money then goes specifically for the offender gratuities that they give in return for that particular labor. And then 1 million is to the Government Communication and Information System, and that is to enable the department to continue producing the Vukuzenzele newspaper. So in total, as I've indicated, is 1.6 billion that's allocated for self-financing. Next slide. Okay, then this adjustment is what we call declared unspent funds. So with declared unspent funds, it happens that during the course of the year, some departments, having looked at their expenditure for the first 6 months, they are able to determine that they would not be able to spend their whole allocation at the end of the financial year. So therefore, they come to us as part of the adjustments budget to declare a saving against a portion of their budget that they think they will not be able to spend by the end of the financial year. So instead of waiting until the end of the financial year for them to show underspending, they actually declare the funds to us now as part of the adjustment budget, and we include that in the budget to show that as declared unspent funds. So in total, we have about 1.9 billion or 2 billion, some are rounded off, that is being declared back to the fiscus as part of the adjustments budget process. The main declaration of savings was actually from the Department of Social Development. That is about 1.8 billion, but it's important to highlight and emphasize that this is the saving that the department anticipates to generate from the money that was allocated from the social relief of distress grant. And it's not to say that they are saying that they won't be able to make payments, but it's because the criteria for qualification for the grant, there was reviewed and more stringent criteria was introduced. And therefore, because of that, they've determined that in terms of what we allocated and what they'll be, the total cost that's informed by who qualifies now as part of the new criteria will be less than what we allocated. And hence they are declaring this saving of about 1.8 billion at this point in the year. And then there was also savings that were declared, for example, from the police, about 32 million, and that's specifically for the integrated criminal justice strategy program, where they've realized that some projects will no longer be implemented in the current year and they've been deferred to the next financial year, hence they are declaring those savings. And then we also had other savings from the Department of Small Business Development, National Treasury, as well as Public Works and Infrastructure and Public Enterprises. So in total, declared savings is about 2 billion, as I've indicated. Very important to also highlight here is that as part of this process, we also do look at the spending trends of departments in the first 6 months to be able to estimate, how much is likely to be underspent at the end of the year. And in that regard, we are estimating and projecting that about 3.9 billion from what we have allocated will be underspent at the end of the financial year. And then also we also include here the portion that we see as coming back from local government, which is a repayment to the National Revenue Fund. We are projecting about 2 billion from that. So overall, in total, about 7.9 billion, essentially, we anticipate that will not be spent from what we've allocated as part of the 2022-23 financial year budget. Next slide. Okay, so now we get into the environments and shifts, honorable members, which is another form of adjustment. So what we thought we'll do here is to also give some background information, because often we also get asked the question, on what basis did the National Treasury grant certain approvals to departments to actually shift and move money between programs? So firstly, one of the guiding legislations in terms of environments is Section 43 of the Public Finance Management Act. And Section 43(1) basically provides that the accounting officer for a department may utilize a saving in an amount that was appropriated under one program to defray excess expenditure in another program, but within the same vote, unless the relevant Treasury direct otherwise. And unless the relevant Treasury direct otherwise is what I will talk to when I look at the Treasury regulations, as well as Section 5 of the Appropriation Act of 2022. And then what Section 43(2) then provides for is that the amount of a saving that is now being utilized to defray excess expenditure in another program, it may not exceed 8% of the amount appropriated under that main division. So where a department wants to move more than 8% in a program to another program, they may not do that except with the approval of Parliament. And I'll talk to that when I present some of the environments that require Parliament's approval. And then Section 43(4), very important, begins now to say, also talks to the unless the relevant Treasury direct otherwise, because in Section 43(4), the PFMA says that where a department would like to move money that is specifically and exclusively appropriated, it cannot actually do that except with the approval of either Treasury or even Parliament, depending on what the purpose for those funds are, as well as the type of earmarking that has been implemented. And again, in 43, Section 43(4)(b), it also says that the amount that's appropriated for transfer to another institution may also not be utilized as a saving to defray excess expenditure in another program. And then it also says in C that the amount appropriated for capital expenditure in order to defray current expenditure may also not be the accounting officer does not have the powers to actually authorize those type of environments. And then if we go to the next slide, which is the Treasury regulation, specifically Treasury Regulation 6.3. The Regulation 6.3, which is derived from Section 43 and then Section 76 of the PFMA, which basically prescribes for matters for which the prior approval of the Treasury must be obtained. So in terms of the Treasury Regulation 6.3 and specifically 6.3.1, it notes that whilst acknowledging what Section 43 says, it's very important to note that compensation of employees and transfers and subsidies to other institutions, except those that are in relation to money that's going to other levels of government for purposes of paying levies and taxes that are imposed by legislation. So departments cannot increase compensation of employees and transfers and subsidies unless they get the approval of the National Treasuries. In the similar manner, they cannot create new transfer payments to other institutions without getting the approval of the relevant Treasury. And where the Treasury has earmarked certain allocations for a specific purpose, the departments are not authorized to use those funds for other purposes other than what the funds were allocated for, except with the approval of the National Treasury. And then in 6.3.1D, it also says that the environment of compensation of employees to transfers and subsidies for the payment of severance and exit packages are excluded from the provisions of A and B. In other words, in this section, it authorizes that the department can move money from compensation of employees if it's to transfers and subsidies for the purposes of paying severance or exit packages. Now, if we go to the next slide, then it's very important that whenever we are processing the environment, we always have to read Section 43 alongside Treasury Regulation 6.3 as well as Section 5 of the Appropriation Act, because in some instances in the Appropriation Act, for example, 6.3.1D that I've just read was authorizing that departments can move money from compensation of employees to transfers and subsidies if it's for the payment of severance or exit packages. But because compensation of employees is now specifically and exclusively appropriated, we then had to make provision in Section 5 of the Appropriation Act for that to now be approved by the Minister of Finance, because yes, it's money that's for compensation of employees, but because it's got a certain earmarking level to it now, then departments can no longer just move the money from compensation of employees to transfers and subsidies, even if it's for the payment of severance packages, unless they get the approval of the National Treasury. So Section 5 of the Appropriation Act is mainly now dealing with those instances where, even though certain things may not be permissible in terms of Section 43 and Treasury Regulation 6.4, but in order to expedite service delivery, Section 5 does give authority to the Minister of Finance to approve some of these environments. As I've already indicated, the one from compensation of employees, if the money is to be used for the payment of severance or exit packages. If it's to be used for other purposes, then that requires the approval of Parliament. And then in terms of Section 5.1b, the Minister of Finance can approve that money for goods and services be used within the same vote for compensation of employees. And then also in terms of C, transfers and subsidies to other institutions can be used elsewhere within the same main division, but that must be approved as well by the Minister of Finance or the National Treasury, because those functions are delegated to the head of public finance, which is Dr. Mampo Modise. And then other things that can also be approved is payments for capital assets that they can be used in any main division within the same vote, as well as the payments for financial assets be used elsewhere within the same main division. So these are the environments that can be approved by the National Treasury. And if you go to the next, Mampo. So even though Section 5 does make provision that the Minister of Finance can grant approval for those environments, again, he's not authorized to approve anything that is in excess of 8% of the amount appropriated for the program, because that authority is vested in Parliament. And then it also, the Minister of Finance also cannot approve that money, for example, that's allocated for payments for capital assets, transfers and subsidies, that those can be used for compensation of employees. So only Parliament can approve those environments, which is part of the reason why we engage in this particular process. If we go to the next slide, so now to get into exactly what is it then that Parliament— Yes, Chair.
Please try to finish with the presentation. We were overrunning time. You still have got the special appropriations that we must deal with.
Thank you so much. I'll do that. So this is just to then, I'll summarize this slide share just to basically show, we wanted to show then what are those environments that can be approved by Parliament. So everything that the National Treasury cannot approve then must be approved by Parliament, such as those environments that are in excess of 8% per program, environments where the money is being shifted from compensation of employees that the National Treasury cannot approve, as well as the money that's being shifted from transfers and subsidies and payments for capital assets that cannot be approved by the National Treasury. And just to note, Chair, that the detail and the motivation of is actually included in the adjusted estimates of national expenditure chapter for each of the votes that are affecting environment. So for that detail, we always encourage people to refer to the actual publication, which is the adjusted estimates of national expenditure. And we do use footnotes to specifically indicate to the reader which ones were approved by the National Treasury and which ones require the approval of Parliament. So then the next slide, Chair, is to just show some of the environments that require Parliament's approval, and we've tried to circle those in red so that it's very clear. For example, in the National Treasury, one of the environments that require Parliament's approval is this environment where funds are being shifted from the allocation for the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and it is being shifted to the Financial Intermediary Fund, and that's an amount of 13 million. And then there's also, so just as an example, they are also in total in Program 5, they are shifting more than 8%. So they're shifting 15.7% of the funding that's allocated for Program 5 to other programs. So because it's in excess of 8%, so this would typically then require the approval of Parliament. And then if we look at other examples, I think in the interest of time, Chair, because we've shared the presentation, I won't necessarily go through the details of each, but just to show in Vote 17, Higher Education and Training Authority, these are the environments that require Parliament's approval because money is being shifted from compensation of employees, for example, to transfers and subsidies for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And in health, there's money that's being shifted from Program 3, specifically from the item Business and Advisory Services, and that money is being transferred to the South African Medical Research Council for the Global Adult Tobacco Survey. If we go to the next one, social development from the savings that will be realized from the lower uptake of the social relief of distressed grant, about 538 million of that is then being shifted to write off the social assistance debt. If we go to the next department, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, most of their environments are that they require Parliament approval because they are shifting money from compensation of employees. So they are reducing their allocation for compensation of employees, whilst in the case of communication and digital technologies. Yes, Chair?
I think just jump all these slides. I think it's very clear what is being moved from where to where. I think we'll go to that. Jump to the next step.
Then I think that's the end. That's the end of the presentation, Chair. So I can hand over now to my colleagues in assets and liabilities to do the special appropriation bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nompumelelo. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, honorable members. Duncan Peterson here. I'm responsible for the Asset and Liability Division at the Treasury. Chair, we have a very short presentation, which shouldn't take too long, and it focuses mainly on the conditions embedded or associated with the special appropriation that we are making. My colleague Ravesh will take us through the Transnet and Denel issues, and then our colleagues from Public Finance will speak to the Sunrail issue. Chair, before they start the presentation, I just want to make 3 very brief background points before we get into the special appropriation bill that we tabled at the time of the MTBPS this year. The first point, Chair and honorable members, is that we were in a very fortunate position this year because of the positive developments on the revenue side that placed us in a position in order to table the special appropriation bill and to assist some of these state-owned entities with some of their balance sheet challenges. So I do want to make the point that this is an unusual step that we are taking, and it is very much a function of the better than expected revenue position. The second point, Chair, is that we are really taking this opportunity to try to address some of the financial and operational challenges in these state-owned entities and support their turnaround efforts. And you will see that the presentation that we are about to present, I think, speaks directly to some of those issues, because ultimately for us, it's about how can we support the balance sheets of these entities so that they become sustainable and do not continuously return to the fiscus for additional bailouts. And then finally, Chair, before I hand over to Ravesh, I think the minister has made this point, and I think we've also made the point that we are very concerned about continuous fiscal support to state-owned companies, including the way in which these types of fiscal support crowd out very important social expenditure. And I think that's why we've tried to move to a situation where we are imposing, and we discussed this also with the committees last week, we are imposing conditions that we hope will really draw a very clear link between these equity supports that we are providing and the ability of these state-owned companies to achieve the operational and financial improvements that they need in order for them, in order for us to reduce the burden that they are posing on the fiscus and the manner in which they are crowding out other very important expenditure. So with those few words, Chair, let me now hand over to Ravesh. If he can just put the presentation in slide mode, and then I think we've got about 5 or 6 slides, and then he'll take us through it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Peterson, and good morning to the honorable members and honorable chair. So basically, I'm going to take you through Denel and Transnet, and then Dumebi will take us through on Sandra. So basically, as has been mentioned, the minister has introduced a special appropriation bill that was tabled last week at the MTBPS. It's 3 items on the bill: 3.3 billion for Denel for the implementation of its turnaround plan, and then we've got 23.736 for Sunrail, and then lastly 2.9 billion for Transnet for the acceleration of repair and maintenance of locomotives. I think an important point, in fact, 2 important points to mention here is that these payments or these amounts will only be dispersed when the minister is satisfied that the required conditions are met, and also that these are also still at this stage provisional allocations. So as and when the bill is enacted into the Special Appropriation Act, there will be then final conditions that could be attached to the ones that we're going to share with the committee now. So if I go straight into Denel, basically, just quickly on Denel, there is a turnaround plan of which there's a funding requirement of 5.2 billion. And from this, 1.8 billion will be raised by Denel through the disposal of non-core assets, and 3.4 billion through the recapitalization, which is what we're discussing now in terms of the bill. And we have reported at last week's MTBBS that they've already raised 900 million rand through the DMPD. And in fact, there's also progress being made, and we shortly should be seeing a further 100 million rand with a PFM application, which we just received now. So that amount should increase to 1 billion rand fairly shortly. And then lastly, the 2 points that we want to mention here on the intro on Denel is that the funds received from the fiscus and the disposal of the non-core assets will be used to settle remaining current and legacy obligations, and also to avoid any threats of liquidation, and also to help and assist now with restructuring costs, and to also sustain its anticipated growth opportunities where it has an order book currently of 12 billion. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, that funding will be provided to the entity subject to various conditions. And these conditions have been split out into pre-conditions and post-conditions. I won't go through all of them, but I think the key point in terms of the preconditions is the disposal of the non-core assets by the end of March 2023, which I've mentioned before. Also, that the entity will have to submit a strategic equity partnership strategy for its divisions, and that, as I mentioned again, and we're re-emphasizing this, is that funds will only be dispersed following adherence to preconditions. So there could be a staggered approach in terms of as and when they meet preconditions, that we will then release certain funding. Post conditions are generally basically just to ensure that Denel and DPE would draw specified government guarantees that they currently have of 4.5.9 billion, and then that Denel also continue to submit its quarterly reports to DPE and Treasury. I think importantly on the post conditions is that no bonuses be paid following the receipt of recapitalization and the period of the turnaround implementation. And then, Chair, if I move quickly on to Transnet, basically, if we recall that Transnet has incurred operational losses in the 21-22 financial year, and this is largely attributable to the shortages of the freight rail locomotives, and also the ability to repair and maintain these locomotives. So basically, with the 2.9 billion that will be allocated is purely and only earmarked for repair and maintenance of freight rail locomotives, and also to improve the ability to service the coal industry, which will also help the South African economy. This 2.9 billion, Chair, is different from the 2.937 billion that Nompu mentioned before in the unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure. And then lastly, from my side, in terms of the Transnet conditions, apart from the Section 54 applications that which must be approved by the Minister of Finance as well, I think the important and key significant conditions is that Treasury will be undertaking a review of all freight rail corridors and associated port operations. We're busy with that process. And also that they will be reporting to us on a monthly basis in terms of how they're addressing the operational challenges, and also the rehabilitation of locomotives and the impacts on volumes as well. And as we've said in the introductory slide, is that these conditions will be reviewed on an annual basis. Thank you. That's all from my side. And I'll hand over to Dumebi, who will take us through SANRAL. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to everyone on the platform. So in relation to SANRAL's conditions, as you are quite aware now, there has been an impasse on the payment of tolls on GFIP, and that has left SANRAL in a position where servicing its debt is becoming troublesome. And to Duncan's earlier point around, now that we find ourselves in a fortunate position that we've collected more revenue than was previously anticipated, SANRAL is, for that reason, benefiting from an intervention around potentially preventing it from defaulting on some of its debts that has been guaranteed by government. And to this end, 23.7 billion has been provided to SANRAL to help it in the repayment of the maturing debt and interest for 2022-23 and 2023-24 financial years. years. And this amount is really just for the repayment of SANRAL's debt and debt obligations. And because there are government guarantees on SANRAL's debt, as these debts become mature and become due and payable, SANRAL's guarantee would then fall in line with these allocations. As one of the conditions that is attached to this allocation, SANRAL cannot raise or refinance debt until the Minister of Finance communicates otherwise. Next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to the allocation that has been given, there are other allocations that have been, there are other conditions that are attached to the allocation. The first thing that it's been 2 tranches. So the initial 8.98 billion will be released within 10 days of the special appropriation bill being passed. And this is to address both debt that is maturing within the year, as well as interest payments that are also maturing and that also require between now and the 31st of March 2023. In addition to that, I guess also to improve performance of SANRAL, not just around GFIP, but just general performance. And given that this allocation will have implications around the road financing, one of the conditions that has been attached to this is that the Department of Transport must submit a draft road funding policy by the 31st of January 2023. It has been working, the department has been working on this policy, but now given the pressures around road financing, we see this as an opportunity to fast track the delivery of road financing policy. In addition to that, there are just a few other things that I guess SANRAL might have been struggling with around supply chain management. So we are putting this as a condition to also help the delivery of infrastructure to improve supply chain management policy within SANRAL. That is also a condition that has been attached to this transfer. In addition to that, given the announcement by the Minister of Finance that the debt for GFIP will be split 70-30, the agreement has to be signed to ensure that the provincial government, so Gauteng, will be delivering on its end of the 30% that would then be carried, and how they intend to deliver that will be signed in an MOU. And finally, in addition to some of the conditions around that, around the performance of the SANRAL board, Treasury will also then retain the right to request updates on the progress that has been made in meeting any of the above conditions. I think those are my 2 slides. I stand to be corrected. If not, then I'll hand over to Ravesh or Duncan.
Okay, thank you, Dumebi.
Thanks, Dumebi, and thanks, Ravesh. Chair, that's it from our side. Back to you.
Thank you, Mary Jane and the team, Dr. Mampo and the team. Oral members, it was quite a long presentation, or long presentations. You know how we do it. Can I have indications of the oral members who would like to interact with the presentations? You can deal with any of the presentations. Team Treasurer will decide who's taking what. Oral members?
Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana.
Kaiso.
Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Sarupen.
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa. Honorable Matafa, who's there? Who's after Honorable Matafa? Okay, I didn't get that. Any other oral member? Honorable Sarupen, I got you. Thank you. Any other honorable member? I've got Honorable Lenza, Honorable Kaiso, Honorable Sarupen, Honorable Matafa. Honorable members, let's then proceed since we have got many presentations. I will be strict with time, but I'm giving it a little bit more time per member, maximum 6 questions. And maximum 6 minutes. After that, I'll cut you. Can I start with Honorable Mlenzana?
Yes, good morning, Chairperson. I'm trying to get here. I've got my video at least.
Yeah.
Good morning, Chairperson and the Team Treasury. Let me welcome the presentation. And also, before asking a question, Chair, acknowledge the fact that at least it has been good that we had enough time to go through the presentations and we could be able to apply our minds. Thank you, Dr. Mampo and team for that. Chair, if this would be a sermon, you know I'm a preacher, I would have a theme which I believe Team Treasury would run through, not only from today. Just checking, Chairperson, on the impact, if Team Treasury has any impact assessment tool as far as our budget that we normally issue, doesn't have an impact to the ordinary electorate? If yes, how, what can we say? Remember, we are now almost past the midterm. But then, Chair, the question which is now strict to Team Treasury, regardless of the teams, would be what is the impact of the consumer price index, the CPI, on inflation forecast for 2022. Remember, it has been revised to 6.7%. What does it say to the ordinary man on the street? The second one would be keeping balance between the debt service costs and our overall expenditure. Are we in keeping, Dr. Mampo? What negative impact does underspending have on debt service costs? What I'm trying to say here, Chair, is that we continue borrowing and we continue servicing the debt. But the reasoning behind us servicing the debt doesn't augur or balance the expenditure. We borrow money, but the money that we have borrowed money for is actually not spent accordingly. It ends up not spent in actual fact. But that side, we have to service the debt. This is what I'm asking in terms of the impact. Chair, there was this mention of provincial allocations, wherein it was said, if I noted well, only 2 provinces, namely the Eastern Cape and Limpopo, were ready to receive such allocations. Now, what one would be interested in is how do we measure the state of readiness to the extent that we could say it's these 2 provinces which were then ready. And then the follow-up question would be, what is then going to happen with the rest of other provinces? Are we now going to say, you are not ready, we are not given money, then close shop, or you are not ready, there is money somewhere in the kitty, but we will assist you so that you are able to get what is due to you? 2 questions. In fact, it's 1 question broken into 2, Chair, which is the last one. One would like to have just the total figures, if possible, Dr. Mampo and the team. How much have been spent to date on rehabilitation of Mfuleni? Figures. If we could also receive, when did the project start in terms of the financial years? How much have we spent? up to now, so that we can be able to check if pumping in money in Fuleng is worth doing it or not. The same question would go to ESCOM. To ESCOM, I'm deliberate, Chair. I'm starting from 2012 deliberately. How much has been spent to ESCOM, be it in the form of bailouts or through the Section 16 or whatever intervention that you may call it? Because I've noticed that now, Dr. Mampo, you keep on now changing terminology, whether you're calling it assistance, intervention, bailout, or what. But if one can know how much in total. Thanks, Chairperson. If given chance, I would come back.
You still have got time. Continue. You've got a minute.
Okay, I still have some time, Chairperson.
Yeah, I've got a minute, yes.
A minute. Okay, just for this minute, Chairperson. Dr. Mampo and team, it's going back to the theme that I was saying I would be looking at. How is your strategy in terms of assisting these underperforming entities, particularly on the fact that now this one is biased, Chairperson, because I sit in the team looking at the performance of Auditor General. You would have, Dr. Mampo, those entities and municipalities which are unable to pay Auditor General. Is it not time that you pay directly the dues to Auditor General? Same will happen with those which are owing ESCOM. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Lenzana. Honorable Kaiso, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Allow me not to switch on my video. This gadget have corrupted image, so I would ask the Chair not to excuse me not to switch on the video there. Let me welcome the presentation made by Treasury, Department of Treasury, led by Dr. Mampo and your team. Chair, I think let me start with the first ones that are positive here, in as far as, you know, assistance to state-owned enterprise or state-owned companies, such as GNL, Central and the Transnet support. Yes, I think it's very good and very positive. Otherwise, we would not talk about, you know, a state that seeks to play a developmental role in the absence of this. So now I want to just immediately take a cue from the words of the reference, especially around ESCOM. You know, it's very good. We're doing well that as ESCOM must be assisted to move out from the position where it stands now. But I think it will be fair from our side as ourselves as a committee to make fair demands now, or fair yes. And let me just sound a warning that some of this information they were presented to us from the, for instance, FFC point of view, which then also advised the committee on budget. So now I understand that Treasury, when it comes to ESCOM, there were measures that were put that you were monitoring on quarterly basis and give report as to whether ESCOM is complying with the conditions set or not complying, or what were the reasons. But as time goes by, and in as far as after the statement was done, and also an indication that there's going to be now very strict measures. Now, which very strict measures are you gonna come up with on top of the ones that you had, or what are the loopholes on the restrictions that you put in as far as the bailout was concerned in the special appropriation for ESCOM? And I don't think it's wise that we only invest through just putting bailout there to assist ESCOM. I think there has to be a look at the, the whole administrative infrastructure of ESCOM. It's like, trying to fill up water in a bottomless bottle. Pouring money there, but the administrative infrastructure is very poor. The people who are running the administration there are serious problems there. So how are you going to manage that, giving money where there's administrative infrastructure is poor? So it means you need to overhaul that administrative infrastructure itself. Start with it first and say, now money is going to the safe hands. You won't hear a situation where people reporting there's been a problem of infrastructure, decaying infrastructure over more than 10 years, singing the same song, moving forward to next 10 years. There's been a problem of decaying infrastructure. No, it means there's a problem in terms of planning. Now it means no. Let me rather, so when I send money there, I must also say it is in the safe hands where people will be so that you avoid now just sending money to anybody there who seem not to be able to handle that, and who's only capable to say, I will only request bailout because I can't do anything with the infrastructure. So I think it will be very fair. And then, so I just want to know from Dr. Mampo, what are the gaps which have been there in as far as those conditions were concerned? Before you move to the stricter conditions. Secondly, I just want to know what is the problem of not imposing tax on these multinational companies who are making huge excess profit, especially when it comes to high interest rates being imposed. They actually have excess of profits, especially those multinational corporations. So, but they are not being taxed, and they've got the doctrine of retrenchment and right sizing, doing anything which benefit themselves and leaving out the poor. But then they are not being taxed. There's nothing that is happened. They just benefit from the excess profits and they live, they rejoice. So what is the problem of imposing? Because there's a lot of excess profits which has been generated by this multinational corporate during the high interest rates. But I also know from the advice that we have that the interest rates pose a danger to macroeconomic stability, or has a danger to macroeconomic stability. So now, what is the take of Treasury with regard to this matter? Because I mean, it's an advice that we've been cautioned to say we have to look at this matter, especially when it comes to hiring also poses a danger to macroeconomic stability. Let me come back home here. During the presentation on the expanded disaster funds, if I'm calling it quite properly, you make mention of special funds for these disasters which occurs without really having to wait for budget announcement in February 2023 and 2023. But this will make provision for such incidents which has occurred in KZN and Eastern Cape and other places. But I also want to include Free State. I want to understand, where do you locate them? Because I didn't hear you making reference to Jagersfontein mine dam burst there, which wiped out people and their belongings recently. So I don't know whether in the municipal grant or provincial disaster fund or through, but it must be at least be located somewhere. So I just want to understand from Dr. Mampo, where is the issue of Jagersfontein is going to be located? If it's not anywhere, one would request that it must find a way to be accommodated such that now the interest of those people, because it was also a disaster, like other disaster in KZN, Eastern Cape, and yeah. So that would be my yes. Now on the land bank,
Honorable Kais,
yeah, you see,
big injury time. Please move to us to conclude.
Oh, no, okay. No, Chair, I think let me sum up those questions. Otherwise, one would expect a response. Then if we do not get the response, maybe we then have to come back at some certain stage. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Laiso. Honorable Sarupen, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chair, let me start with the MTBPS and some of the things that were stated that was discussed today. And one of them was on bailouts crowding out social spending and other government investment. Could Treasury tell us what areas of the budget are actually suffering as a consequence of these bailouts, what they've had to sacrifice as well in the requests they've received from various government departments to shore up bailouts, and if the quantum of bailouts is sufficient that it would be able to potentially fund a basic income grant? I'd just like to get a sense of that. Then secondly, Chair, with regards to the statement that in the MTBPS and the budget outlook around achieving a budget surplus in the medium term, 2023-2020, considering that they're going to be shifting Eskom debts onto the government's books, then in the MTBPS plan that they are going to move Eskom debts onto the government balance sheets, I would like to understand how much per annum they intend on doing from next year. Are they going to do it all in one go in the budget in February? Are they intending on doing it over several years? What exactly is the detail there? Because there was absolutely none given apart from the announcements. And the quantum given was the word significant, which is not a number. Then, Chair, with regards to meeting some of the budget targets, we have had surpluses as a consequence of the global commodities boom of late in the post-COVID environment. But does the Treasury think that their projections are accurate in the medium term, considering a commodity slowdown that would likely hurt the fiscus? And then, Chairperson, just on the bailouts I see to Denel this year, as well as a few other entities, the conditions that have been presented on Denel, the pre and post conditions, some of the Transnet ones, Sanral, but particularly the Denel ones, they're very, very, very weak. I mean, finalizing a memorandum of cooperation is not exactly ensuring good management. To submitting quarterly performance reports, what is Treasury actually going to do with these quarterly performance reports? We've seen these types of conditions being imposed onto state-owned companies before, and they achieve very little, if anything. They're compliance conditions that are easy to meet. They're not anything to do with the actual management performance of these entities. And I'd like to understand if Treasury is looking at tightening some of these conditions, particularly to Eskom, if they're going to be taking on a whole lot of Eskom debts. If they're going to put all of its procurement processes, we know that Eskom was a major victim of state capture, under close supervision in return for some of these bailouts. Same for Denel, and if not, why not? Why are they not willing to put procurement processes and all sorts of systems under very, very tight supervision in return for bailouts, and why are they choosing such weak conditions?
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Matafa, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Chair. I request that I keep my video off. My connectivity has been unstable ever since the meeting started.
Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Dr. Mampo and the team, and thank you for the presentation that came through. Chair, I just have a few questions that I just want to pose to the team. And the first one was in part covered by Honorable Mlenzana when he is speaking about budgeting for impact. Now, my question there would have been to find out from National Treasury, what measures are there in place to ensure that the national strategic objectives are not lost within the environments and the shifts or the budget adjustments? I'm just interested to find out if whether is there a possibility that this environment can move away from the president's injunction, and also maybe speaking on monitoring, also to find out generally if whether there is a way that the budget can be monitored throughout its implementation to ensure that these particular objectives are protected, particularly when you speak about the major one, which is the ERRP. Chair, still on major injunctions and the ERRP, there is one commitment by the president that part of the economic recovery will require employment stimulus programs. Now, we have noted that, especially in the AENE, there are departments, probably when you look at them, basic education, higher education, and training and labor. They always get approval for environments and shift funds originally budgeted for filling of vacancies. Now, for me, when you have budgeted for filling of vacancies and then you come back and say, I am not hiring, I'm moving funds, it can be one of two things. Either maybe the budget ceiling cap came into play, or there's simply poor planning. But which is of concern for me, Chair, is that every time we speak about non-meeting of targets and commitments by departments, they always lament lack of capacity internally. But at the same time, there are no vacancies, or vacancies are there, but they are not filled. Can I have the view of Treasury on this issue of vacancies? And as I've mentioned, Chair, it's just the three that we picked up, but there will be other departments as well that are struggling to fill vacancies, and yet they still complain lack of capacity internally. Chair, the other question is on Treasury itself. I know that in the past they had challenges with their internal financial management system, but I see now again in the adjustment expenditure, it shows a environment of approximately 175 million, which was budgeted for this particular system. Now, could this be an indication of difficulties in implementing the system? Or is there any other reason that maybe the department will share with us as to why would they move such a huge amount in relation to this particular system. Second last, Chair, it's on the issue of the 13 million rands that is taken away from the DBSA to finance financial intermediary fund. Can maybe the Treasury provide reasons for this virement? Because in our view, DBSA is amongst the institutions with financial constraints. So taking money away from them is the last thing that we'd have thought as a committee that the Treasury will allow. The last one, Chair, sort of underscores some of the points that Honorable Surapen was raising on conditions and the strength of these particular conditions. I'll speak on the NEL, Chair. We are told that we'll require about 5 billion, which will be capacitated by government at 3.4 billion, and the NEL raising 1.8 billion. But if you look at the preconditions, there is a condition that reads the following: submission of a strategic equity partnership strategy. Now, my question is, if we are then saying we need 5 billion and automatically budget for the entire 5 billion, but then we say we're going to need an equity partner, are we not anticipating that this equity partner will bring some equity? Or is this condition forward-looking that maybe the particular equity partner will bring in equity in future? Because my view is that there should be an indication as to, if we're speaking to an equity partner, there should be a particular view that we have that this equity partner must bring a particular amount into this particular agreement. Let me pause there, Chair. Those are the issues that I have. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to engage with the Treasury. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Before I proceed, can I just check if there's an honorable member who didn't raise his or her hand then that would like to come in? Okay, let me check. Honorable Lenzana, any burning issue that you'd like to add? Honorable Kaiso, a question? One. I'm being very generous. Honorable Kaiso, any question which is pressing? Honorable Sarupen? Honorable Matafa?
I'm happy, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me come in and let me start by thanking Team Treasury, led by Madi Jeng and Dr. Mampo. Thank you very much for the present, very informative and extensive presentations that you have made. And also let me start by saying that we welcome the additional allocation of about 48.9 billion rand on the division of revenue, especially because this was done without additional borrowing and within the fiscal framework, which is improving, as shown by the improving debt to GDP ratio, the deficit, amongst others. I think that has allowed the government to intervene on a number of places, especially around the disaster issues and the question of recapitalization of the state-owned companies, which would have been a little bit disastrous to the budget were it not for the windfall that we got. On the adjustment, we have got debt service costs going up, and obviously we didn't go out and borrow more. So am I correct when I'm saying that this is the function of the rising interest rate of the South African Reserve Bank? I'd like to hear your comment. And then tariffs, they are not classified as unavoidable and unforeseen. If the changes in tariffs, especially the increase, are not classified as unavoidable and unforeseen. Am I correct? what is the thinking behind this? Because if there's an increase in tariff, which I was not aware of, it should be an unforeseen and unavoidable, but I'm sure there's a better explanation if you can deal with this. More of a clarification about the rollover funds. These rollover funds, are these the rollover funds from the previous financial year, which was 2021-22, or rollover funds from for 2022-23? So just a clarification there, exactly what are we dealing with? The question of employment, and especially the young people, or let me say unemployment, has been raised as one of the serious challenges that the country has. But I see there's a rollover on the Presidential Employment Initiative. What's the reason for that? Yeah, let me put it that and say, how can that be avoided in future? Because unemployment, it's one of those things. Perhaps it's related to the failure of filling of vacancies by departments, that despite the fact that affects service delivery, that at least would be my hypothesis. But again, there are 2 or 3 or 4 people who would have had jobs, but who don't fill vacancies. Can you have more of an explanation as to exactly what's the problem there? There's a movement of about okay, let me see. There's a movement from social development to Transnet of about 1.769 billion rand, if I'm correct, or 2.9 billion rand from social development to Transnet. With this poverty that we are having, is this justifiable? How is this being justified? Because we know for a fact that so many families are on the brink of poverty, if not living in poverty. So, but there are funds that are moving from social development to Transnet. How do we justify that? Then the next question would be, why would local government not spend 2 billion rand? Again, we know what is the position of local government. Why is that money not moved within local government to try and deal with the problems of some of the municipalities that we know? On the SOC's bailout, it's well and good to hear SOCs coming for bailout recapitalization. I think the story of Denel has been told many times, so it's understood. The story of Sanral, we know that it has to do with the e-tolls by and large. But when it comes to Transnet, I didn't hear exactly how did we reach the stage where we are now, where, because as far as I'm concerned, as far as my memory can serve me, I don't remember a Transnet coming for a bailout. I think before, it's very important that Madijeng, Mampo, Ravesh, we get the story. Duncan, we get the story about this. Why bailout? What has happened? How did they reach a situation where there's money that must be moved from social development to Transnet, and again, there should be a special appropriation bill dealing with Transnet. I think the committee, parliament, and the people of South Africa would like to hear exactly what happened. And also for me, what's important, apart from these financial outcomes that we expect from these SOCs when we recapitalize them, but what others in terms of performance? Do we have any indicators that we say that would like you, for instance, in Transnet, to carry so much more freight because of our intervention? What type of other indicators that we put for these companies that we are bidding out? For instance, when it comes to ESCOM, we know that we want more reliable electricity supply when we recapitalize them. Whether we get that or not, it's something else, but at least we know that is type of a performance that we need. But with other SOCs, what are we saying? I think those will be our questions. And let me go back to you, Madijeng and the team, Mampo and the team. And I always say, as you know, that for those questions, we know that you are just the bearer of the news, be they good or bad, from government administration. For those areas where you don't have questions, don't give us convenient questions. Do what you always do, that will get back to us, write back to us, so that we can have a better understanding of the issues that have been raised by the honorable members. Back to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, honorable members, for the difficult questions as always. Chairperson, I think the first one I always really ask is that as much as we are the Treasury, unfortunately, we are not the accounting officer of the Treasury. Therefore, Momo must be called as the accounting officer for the Treasury to explain the issues relating to IFMS. I think that is a request from my side, because as I say, it will be very difficult for me to understand why certain decisions are taken as IFMS, as Momo will be responsible for this. In
Dr.
terms of
Mampo,
the other questions,
Dr. Mampo,
yes, Chair.
Just on that one, so that I don't lose it, right? I think when you are here, you also represent the DG and the minister and the deputy minister. So we'll expect you to convey those questions, that these are the questions that require your attention. I think let's do that, because we can't guarantee, if we look at our program, that we'll have an opportunity to also call them back. But on the one that we have raised, fortunately, we had an interaction with the DG on the IFMS, and we have requested him to give us a written response. But I'm saying, as a general rule, those issues which you think, as you always say, they're above your paycheck, that you please give them to the people who sent you here. Okay, thank you.
I will definitely do that, Chairperson. So the questions on inflation, just in general, Chairperson and honorable members, inflation is always something that we look at, something that we worry about. Inflation impacts on the spending. There are a lot of spending items that are linked to inflation. So, for example, the social grants will be linked to inflation. The medical expenses in health will be linked to inflation. So, most of those we monitor the spending of that, and what we then tend to do is that we adjust for inflationary pressures in the next cycle of the MTBPS, or the next cycle of the budget. So we do take those into consideration, and we do also look at some of the spending that have exchange rate implications, especially for departments such as DECO and National Treasury, where if there's significant depreciation in the exchange rate, then we have to consider additional funding just to deal with those. I mean, Chairperson, whether National Treasury support the increase in the interest rates or not, what is key here is that the Reserve Bank has a mandate to ensure that inflation is kept under wraps and protect the value of the currency. So whatever decision that they make to ensure that this is achieved, Treasury, of course, will support whatever decision they make. They are independent, and they have their own teams that deal with this, and whatever decision, as I say, they make, Treasury supports it. What we do is we then look at what implications will that have on the rest of the items. And of course, on the borrowing cost, the moment there's increases in inflation or interest rates, it will impact on the will impact on the interest rate, but I'll let Duncan just deal with this. What is also for me to respond to Chairperson, I think it is the budget for impact. Most of the times, Chairperson, we struggle with this question quite a lot, because what we do is we look at the budget, we look at the strategic plans of the departments, and we will allocate funding based on what they say they're going to do. In the recent years, what we are picking up is departments struggling to really spend the allocated funds for even new projects or for the projects that they already have in the system. There are a lot of reasons, Chairperson, that are cited by the department in terms of why they're underspending. As much as Treasury tries to work with the departments, it becomes a bit difficult for us to make sure that they spend all the monies. But there are different types of underspending, Chairperson, and I'll just get to the environment now. The different types of underspending, if an underspending is due to efficiencies in the system, then of course we always welcome that. And one example of that, Chair and honorable members, would be the budget for social development, where basically what social development has done in this round was to make sure that they increase or they intensify the criteria just to make sure only people who deserve the 350 gets the 350. So what they have done is that they've spoken to, or they contacted the banks to make sure that they do what we call an income test, where they look at what they look at whether a person receives income, and if that person doesn't receive income, then they qualify for the 350. If they have income that is less than the food poverty line, they do receive the 350. This was not done in the previous round, Chairperson, and making sure that only the people that deserve to get the 350 get the 350 was one of the reasons why we saw the underspending. Another thing, Chairperson, is that what we picked up in the system, you will have people who have multiple bank accounts, and they will definitely use the one bank account that doesn't receive income to apply for the 350. But if you do an income test and across the banks, you check whether one person who has 3 bank accounts, do they receive income, then those people will then be, they will not be successful in applying for the 350. So it is not, Chairperson, that we are ignoring the fact that there is poverty, that the people who are deserving government support. All we are doing is that we want to focus on the people that deserve the support and take out the people who are just taking chances in terms of applying for the 350. So the underspending in social development is due to the efficiencies in the system rather than it being due to lack of care of or lack of understanding or lack of appreciation of the poverty levels that we have. So we're basically just trying to clean the system. Another criteria that was introduced, Chairperson, that was not there in the past, was to make sure that the applicants apply every 3 months for the grant. This is not done, Chair and honorable members, to make it difficult for the people who deserve the grant to access the grant. This is made to ensure that people who get employed during the course of the year don't continuously receive the grant for the rest of the year, because this is mainly for people who are unemployed and who don't have income. So if you get employed during the course of the year, then you will no longer get the 350 grant. So that criteria has also resulted in some of the people exiting the grant system during the course of the year. So the efficiencies that we are putting into the system are what resulted into the savings that we can then see from the Department of Social Development. Chairperson, the reason why we look at environments, especially from compensation, it's not mainly for us to to get departments to then be unable to complete or be unable to fill the vacancies. For most of this, if you look at the reasoning for this, is just to make sure that they can pay for leave gratuities and to pay for people that are exiting. And the manner in which we classify it is that leave gratuities are not paid under compensation of employees, are paid under transfers to household. So most of the changes in compensation or virement from compensation to transfers and subsidies are mainly because of leave gratuities that departments will have to pay. So what we also look at, Chair and honorable members, in terms of virements is that is the reason why you have such strict criteria for virements and why certain virements have to come to Parliament for approval is precisely because we don't want departments to shift money from what we think is strategic to other areas where spending may not be seen as strategic. So bringing them to Parliament, we want to make sure that there's assessment. The department do a critical job in assessing whether these virements are critical and they don't impact on their strategic focus and they don't impact on how they're supposed to deliver. And in that case, we just try to make sure that they are not significant virements. I mean, the reason why you have so many virements for Parliament is that any virement that is 8% or more of the allocated budget has to be approved by Parliament, is precisely because we don't want departments to move significant amounts of money out of the system and then not out of the program that was allocated the funds into something else. So we do manage the virements, Chair and honorable members, and we do make sure that whatever we as Treasury propose or approve and also support Parliament, we looked at the impact that it will have on the project that the money was initially allocated for. Then Chairperson, on the rollovers, firstly, your question on which funds are those. So these would be the rollovers for 2021-22. Basically here we looked at two types of virements, Chairperson, of rollovers, Chairperson. The first one was those rollovers where commitment was already made and there were invoices that were finalized, but the departments couldn't really pay those in the previous years. We consider those, but Chairperson, we also then had to look at the presidential employment intervention. And as the Treasury, we're proposing that money that hasn't been spent for the PEP projects in the previous year, it is then rolled over because the need has not changed. The need is still there. So we did allow almost all the funds for the projects to be rolled over because most of the genuine reason for the departments not to spend this was they were not ready to implement. So once they finished off their processes and then they started implementing, then it was much easier for us to allow them to roll over the funds. And this is on addition to the funds that we have given to them for the current year. So this is just to make sure that they fast track their implementations of the implementation of the PEP project. And then the question then, Chairperson, on how underspending impacts on the debt. I mean, of course, what becomes a bit of a problem, Chairperson and honorable members, is that when you start picking up the underspending during the course of the year, the certain departments who can manage to spend the money for the rest of the year or in the last quarter of the year, there are other departments that are likely not to spend. But when we do the adjustment appropriation, as Mpumi said, we then look at what is the potential underspending, and then how do the numbers look like, and what are the unspent funds that are declared back into the NRF. If we do that adjustments in the MTBPS, Chairperson, then it makes it easier for us to know how much we need to borrow and how we look at the debt and how that impacts on the debt servicing cost. So what we try not to do, Chair and honorable members, is to increase the borrowings despite the underspending that we see. So we do use the numbers in the fiscal framework of underspending and declared savings for the in-year, just to make sure that we look at what do we need to borrow for the rest of the year to avoid borrowing unnecessarily if we can pick up such underspending. Then the last one from me, Chairperson, I think it's the issue of the Auditor General and the ESCOM debt. I think in general, Chairperson, we have very big issues that we need to resolve in terms of how the national or how government departments, whether provinces, municipalities, how they owe each other, and how do we then deal with the intergovernmental debt that we see. In terms of the Auditor General, we have had some of the conversations with them, but all in all, Chairperson, what this means is that the Auditor General will then have to make sure that whatever services they provide for municipalities or department, it is funded for. We do allocate funding to the Auditor General, but not full funding for the cost of all the audits. So what we have advised them to do was that before they do an audit, they need to ensure that they have a memorandum of agreement or whatever contract they have with the entity or municipality or department that they will be auditing, such that when they are done with the audit, they can then be paid. Some of the issues that are there is that a municipality, for example, will say, please do the following audit, and then the Auditor General will pick up additional things that they need to work on. So if that is done, then the Auditor General and that municipality need to make sure that they revise the contract to take into consideration the new work that the Auditor General needs to do, such that when the period or the payment period comes, at least there's no argument on what work was done vis-a-vis what was the initial contract. But I mean, this is a big problem that we will have to deal with. And it's not only the Auditor General and ESCOM, there's other entities that are struggling to get payments from the other levels of the state. So I think a conversation on how we do this is going to help. But there's also the issue of the responsibility of the accounting officer to make sure that they do the payment. And we tried as the Treasury to force these payments for 30 days, but at the end, unfortunately, the law dictates that the accounting authority has the responsibility to make sure that they do the proper payments within reasonable times. Can I please ask Duncan to deal with all the SOE's questions, and then Mema Dijeng, please deal with the intergovernmental questions.
Thanks, Mampo. Jay, if it's okay with you, just to come in on some of those questions, I'll cover some of them and then I'll hand over to Ravesh as well. I think Ravesh will deal with the question on the total spend thus far on ESCOM. I think there were a few questions, Chair, about how we are going to deal with arrears due to ESCOM. And I think that will obviously be part of the final ESCOM proposal and package that we will table, as the ministers indicated at the time of the budget. Linked to that, one of the honorable members made the point about the quality of the administrative infrastructure at ESCOM and the fact that it needs an overhaul. And I think those other ESCOM challenges will need to be part of the final package that is announced and dealt with, because we are of the view that unless one deals with the ESCOM problem holistically, dealing with their debt is not going to put them in a sustainable position. Relating still on ESCOM, Chair, there was a question about whether ESCOM's debt will be taken over in one go or over time. We have indicated that that work will be finalized between now and the budget, and we still have various options on the table. And each of those options have costs and benefits. So taking over the debt, a portion of the debt in one go is an option. Taking it over time as and when Eskom meets certain conditions is another option. And then there are various, obviously, permutations in between. The Eskom conditions, which also came up, will be part of that announcement as well. And that is part of what we are currently discussing with Eskom, with the department, and will obviously engage with the Eskom lenders on that issue as well. There was a question, Chair, about whether our fiscal targets are feasible given the commodity price slowdown. I think very simply, we don't assume that the commodity price benefits to our revenue continue beyond next year. And so we therefore consider that at least from a fiscal target perspective, that we are not being over optimistic. Of course, should the strong commodity prices continue, I think that provides us with a potential positive surprise and is in what we call an upside risk, but it certainly is not in the baseline. Then finally, Chair, before I hand over to Ravesh to deal with the question around the Denel equity partner, the total spend on Eskom, just two more points from my side. The one is the relationship between rising interest rates and debt service costs. Our debt service costs are a function of the interest we pay across the different instruments. We've got short-term instruments like Treasury bills, we've got some medium-term instruments, and then we've got long-term instruments like bonds that we issue for a period of 20 or 30 years. Now, of course, changes in the policy rate by the Reserve Bank will have an impact on our short-term interest rates. But our medium and long-term interest rates are much more driven by other factors like long-run inflation dynamics, the sovereign risk premium, and the interest rates, or what we call the risk-free rate, which is international interest rates. So while there is a relationship between the policy rate of the Reserve Bank and our interest burden, and therefore our debt service costs, that's only one part of the equation. I think the long-term drivers of our interest rates are really structural growth and fiscal issues. And therefore, those are really the long-term drivers of our debt service costs. And then finally, there was a question on how did Transnet reach the bailout stage? I think we all know the challenges that Transnet was subjected to over the last few years. In addition to that, they were then hit by several shocks over the last year or so, including, of course, the flood damage that occurred earlier this year. And I think what we are trying to do, Chair, at the moment is to help them in a very targeted way to overcome some of those operational challenges so that then feeds through into their financial improvements and minimizes any future risks that they might pose to the fiscus. I will leave it there, Chair, and hand over to Ravesh to deal with some of those other questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Peterson, and through you, Honorable Chair. I think the question from Honorable Melenzana was around the Eskom bailout. So basically, since 2008, Eskom has been bailed out with 246 billion. And more recently, you would recall that the 230 billion support package was announced in 2019. So of that, already 140 billion has been dispersed. So basically, the amount, just to summarize it, is 246 billion since 2008. There was a question around the conditions from Honorable Sarupen. I think as we've mentioned, we are in the process of already strengthening the conditions, and when the bill is enacted, we will then strengthen those conditions to make sure that Denel does meet those conditions, and we'll definitely strengthen the post conditions. But I think in terms of the reporting, what it does for us is to ensure that the elements or the levers of the turnaround plan is monitored and is achieved, because that's quite important for us, because with the allocation that comes with the turnaround plan, we need to ensure and monitor that the levers of the turnaround plan are in fact achieved, and that's how we actually monitor that through the monitoring committee and the monthly reports. I think the Honourable Matafa, asked a question around the SEP, or the Strategic Equity Partnership for Denel. So as one of the preconditions, we are looking for Denel to share with us their Strategic Equity Partnership at the various levels. It can be a divisional level, so that's quite important for us, because then that will take Denel onto the next level in terms of the order pipeline, because currently with the support that will be provided and which will be augmented by the 1.8 billion, that will take them and help them to achieve the order pipeline of 12 billion. But we also want to see going forward how the entity can survive without any further support from government, and also through including the Strategic Equity Partnerships strategy that we'll also monitor as well on a monthly basis. Chair, you raised a few questions as well in terms of the KPIs, in terms of Transnet. Yes, I think I think much more can be done in terms of strengthening the KPIs of Transnet. Hence, the independent review that Treasury is leading in terms of the port operations and rail operations, where the outcomes of this then will be used to look at the operational efficiencies and areas there that can be improved on, and also how we can then impose that in terms of the Shareholder Compact. And one of the conditions is ensuring that Treasury also plays a part in the Shareholder Compact of Transnet, and also have a say in terms of how we can strengthen some of the areas that we feel from an operational perspective that Transnet can improve. Chair, that's it from my side, and I'll hand over to Malijeng and team. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So maybe I will start with some of the questions of Honorable, Honorable Mlenzana. Yeah, so the first question on the impact assessment tool with respect to the budget, particularly on the electorate, and I think it also lines up with the question that Honorable Matafa asked in terms of whether we measure performance of the budget to ensure that strategic objectives are met. So my comment here is that, in the government system, we do have the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation in the presidency that is also overseeing the medium-term strategic framework that outlines over the 5 years of the electoral cycle, what the priorities are and the indicators, and those priorities obviously have to line up with those strategic objectives. And what I know is that they are coordinating the information on performance mid-year into the 5-year of the current cycle strategic framework. And maybe it would be useful, to also get them to come and reflect in terms of mid-year in the electoral cycle, what has been the performance across the board. Because at the end of the day, the performance will be reflected on each one of the votes that are responsible. What's going on here? Yeah, sorry, Chairperson. That are responsible for each one of the outcomes. So I think that's the point that I wanted to make there. And the other question around adjustments with regard to rural bridges. How do we measure the state of readiness and what will happen to other provinces? So as we indicated, the 380 something that is allocated is meant for Limpopo and mostly for Eastern Cape. So the state of readiness is really reflected by whether the project is ready to go on the ground, which is determined here by the implementing agency with agents, which is Public Works with the Army, and together with Infrastructure South Africa, that also is responsible to ensure that the projects are ready. So it is in their advice in terms of what is ready, and where we understood already work was being done by the Army into those areas. However, we have already indicated that we have allocated around 3.8 billion over the 3 years for the other bridges, which will cut across other provinces in the medium term. So that work is already happening now through ISA and Public Works to also ensure that the state of readiness of other provinces is also, they are in a state of readiness to be able to absorb the money that will be allocated from next year. So how much have we spent on rehab on Mfuleni? So we will maybe undertake here, Honorable, to put together the information, because I don't think we've got the figure offhand in terms of how much has been spent. And obviously we are equally concerned about the impact of that spending, because there has been quite a significant delay in actually addressing the problem. But I think it's something that we can put together information to respond to. So on the issue of allocation of disasters, which is Honorable Gaiso question, where do we locate them? So what we have indicated in the presentation is that there has been allocations that have come from various allocation areas that are reflected in various grants and in the adjustments. And UNO, there have been allocations to respond either in the adjustment and also as part of the cover. So the way it's allocated is through the relevant vote and also through the relevant grants. So, but I understand that the main issue here is around Jagersfontein issue of the Free State. So what I understand is that the province has declared disaster, and they have made a submission to the National Disaster Agency, and their application is being processed by the NDMC at the moment. So because we have made additional money available through this adjustment to also ensure that the grant can also have the funding. So it means that they will be able to get the allocations through that process. So it is in the system, but I think there was a delay in terms of the process that they had to undertake to declare and also to submit applications to NDMC. So I think, Ian, you can respond on this one on the local government that Honorable Tindis asked, why is it that 2 billion is coming back to the fiscus? Are you there, Ian? Jan, I can't hear you. I think you are muted, unless I am the problem.
No. Thank you,
All right,
Marie-Jane. Good morning, Chairperson, honorable members. The amount that we've penciled in, Chair, that 2 billion, there's two types of rollovers, Chairperson. There's the rollovers that the team have shared with you when the cash has not left the National Revenue Fund, and that's subject to the national rollover process. Chair, then there's a subsequent process where the cash has left the National Revenue Fund, and it's the same principle that apply in a provincial environment relative to how it's applied into the local government. So it means the money has been transferred to the municipality, and we have a very comprehensive process, Chair, as outlined in the Division of Revenue Act. And every year when we issue our budget circular, we communicate with the municipalities the criteria that they have to conform to in order for us to consider a rollover. So, Chair, we receive those requests, we consider them on their merit, we consult with the provincial treasuries and the sector departments that's responsible for the management of those grants. And based on that process, then we advise the municipalities whether their requests are successful or not. Chairperson, now that means those municipalities that ask, because the legislation and DoRAB specifically say the National Treasury will consider the request if there's a legitimate commitment. So that means there's a tender or they've actioned that. So Chair, once that process is concluded for this last cycle, we have advised municipalities on the 19th of October on the outcome of that process. The second process is when, Chair, those municipalities that have declared unspent money in their financial statements that has not asked permission, that's a secondary process. And we then actually work through their financial statements quite in detail to determine did they disclose the underspending for the grants correctly. Secondly, whether there's cash in the bank in order to finance a rollover if there's a request. And Chair, thirdly, if there's no cash in the bank, there's no performance, there's no rollover, then we do what the law suggests we do, is we advise those municipalities that they have to surrender the unspent money to the National Revenue Fund. So Chair, there's a very comprehensive process, and we try to conclude this in time when the next equitable share installment is due. Chair, whether we can then use that unspent 2 billion rand that's been surrendered to then augment or to finance challenges with infrastructure, challenges and things like that. Chair, that's something that we haven't explored yet. I'm sure Mampu will tell you, Chairperson, that the rules as far as rollovers is concerned is very strictly applied by the National Treasury as per the Treasury regulations. But Chairperson, that's in a nutshell the reason why we've penciled an amount in. So on a broader scheme of things, if the equitable share is about 54 billion rand on average, and at the end there's underspending and we surrendered 2 billion, in the broader scheme of things, it may not be problematic, but we understand, Chair, what you are saying to us, that that shortfall or that amount could deal with a number of other challenges in local government. So Chairperson, we haven't convinced our budget office and public finance team yet that we can find a way to rechannel that funding, but as a package and for them to reduce the borrowing cost and the financing, this is the reason why we disclose that, so it's transparent and the committee is fully aware of it. Thanks, Marijeng.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think we have covered all the questions.
Chair, may I request that Nompumelelo just deals with 2 questions that I missed. Thanks, Chair. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mampo. So Chairperson, on my side, I just deal with 2 questions. I think the first one was by Honorable Matafa on the DBSA environment. Just to quickly explain that. So the infrastructure fund, as we know, is being managed by the DBSA. So the money that you see as being environment is from the savings of the operational cost of the infrastructure fund. So the arrangement between Treasury and DBSA is that when it comes to the operations of the infrastructure fund, we split the costs on a 50-50 basis. So from a Treasury perspective, we then allocate our 50%, which is transferred through the National Treasury to the DBSA. So what happened this year is that the estimate of the operational cost of the infrastructure fund at the time of the budget, they were just slightly overestimated. And because now we know the actual cost, there's a bit of a saving, and that's why those funds are then being shifted from the DBSA. So it's not to take away from the resources that the DBSA uses for its own operations, because they don't receive an allocation from the National Treasury. And then on the other question, Chair, I think it was your question on why tariffs and price increases are not regarded as unforeseen and unavoidable. So for expenditure to meet the criteria of unforeseen and unavoidable, it must be both unforeseen as well as unavoidable. So with price increases and tariff adjustments, most of them are actually communicated in advance. So we are able to manage that process as part of the budget process. So they are not truly unforeseen in the context of the word. And to the extent that there may be other adjustments that occur in the course of the year, those are generally dealt with by departments through reprioritization of their existing resources, and if necessary, through the environment process. And those would generally, for example, be in relation to where you find that there are exchange rate fluctuations and the value of the rent either appreciates or depreciates, and we have to pay more than what we have budgeted for, and that is dealt with as part of reprioritization. So that's why it's not unforeseen and unavoidable. Thank you.
Are we done?
Yes, Chairperson, we are done. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Let me again thank Team National Treasury for the presentation and comprehensive responses to the questions raised by the honorable members. Obviously, these are things which are ongoing, and thank you very much for availing yourself, Dr. Mampe and your team, Ms. Marijeng and your team, and everybody else on the platform. Thank you very much. We'll go to the next agenda item. You are free to remain on the platform, or perhaps you want to go and deal with the budget. February is just around the corner, but thank you very much. On the issues perhaps where you think that you want to give us more information, written replies and communication are welcome. Thank you very much. Honorable members, we have minutes which were sent to us. That's the next agenda item. Can we go to those minutes? Let's start with the minutes of the 20th of September 2022. Can I have a mover for the adoption of those minutes?
Matafa moves.
Honorable Matafa moves. Seconder.
Kaiso. Chairperson. Chairperson.
Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
Chairperson. Sorry
Yes.
for the interruption. I received minor clarity from Ms. Peters via WhatsApp for the minutes dated the 20th. It is with regards to bullet 6 under the deliberations. It's just a typo. Should be read as short. So I've already corrected that one. So the minutes will have to be adopted with that correction. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Honorable Chair.
Yes, Honorable Client, please.
Yes, just before we move, I think Honorable Mlenzana attended a meeting, that's why he's been marked absent. Can we also correct that, and with that, and second the minutes, Honorable Chair?
Honorable Mlenzana, still on the platform? Honorable Mlenzana, still on the platform?
Chairperson, Mr. Mlenzana has been bouncing in and out. He's got connectivity issues. But Mr. Kaiso is referring to the minutes dated the 27th of October, Chairperson. I did receive that message from Mr. Mlenzana.
So here we're dealing with the minutes of the 20th, eh?
Yes, we are dealing with the minutes of the 20th now, but Mr. Mlenzana was referring to the minutes dated 7 October.
Yeah. I understand that. So we have moved for the adoption of the minutes of the 20th of September with the correction that Darren has referred to. Agreed? Yes.
Yes, Chairperson. I'm back, and I support.
Yeah, thank you. Can we go to the minutes of the 21st of September? Mover.
Sorry to come in here.
Which one? Which minutes are those?
The ones of the 20th. Chairperson, there's an indication. Chairperson, I've got a challenge here with my this thing. There's an indication that some members were absent, but under the minutes, it reflects them as having submitted an apology. And that is consistent even to the last part that includes Honorable Mlenza. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Darren, you got that. Let apologies.
Chairperson, yes, I've got those. I've got those, Chairperson. We are going to correct it. Mr. Sarupen, Mr. Shaky Mam, and Ms. Ntlangwini, they were all present. They were not there. We didn't get apologies from them. And then the apologies were on behalf of Mr. Mare, Mr. Kwankwa, and Ms. Dikhale. So we just need to correct that, Chairperson.
Is that the minutes of the 20th?
No, that's for the minutes of the 21st of September.
Okay, so the 20th, there's no issue after the correction of what we spoke about.
Yes, yeah. That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay, then let's go to the minutes of the 21st of September. So let's correct the apologies as different from absent, right? So the issue that has been raised by Honorable Peters, right? So with those corrections, can I have the mover for the adoption of the minutes of the 21st of September?
Matafa moves with the amendments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Seconder. Honorable members, seconder.
Kaiso seconds, Chair.
Honorable Kaiso seconds the adoption of the minutes are then adopted of the 21st of September with the corrections that have been shared with us. Let's go to the minutes of the 12th of October 2022. Any amendments there? Minutes of the 12th of October, any amendments?
No.
No amendments. Darren? No amendments, eh? So
no,
can I have...
Chairperson, no amendments for that one.
Okay, so can I have the mover for the adoption of the minutes of the 12th of October?
ISO moves, Chair.
ISO moves. Seconder?
Marais.
Honorable Marais seconds, thank you. Can I have the mover for the adoption of the minutes of the 27th of October? Any corrections there?
Chairperson, yes, is the correction for Mr. Nzana. He indicated that he was in fact present and didn't apologize. So, okay. So we just need to...
So the minutes of the 27th of October, we are amending the minutes to reflect that Honorable Mlenzana was present, not an apology for him. So can I have a mover for the adoption of the minutes with the amendment? Honorable Peters moves. Seconder.
Matafa seconds, Chair.
Honorable Matafa seconds, thank you. The minutes of the 27th of October 22 are duly adopted. That takes care of that agenda item. Can we go to the next agenda item, which is the program of term 4 for the committee? Can we fly to the program, Darren? Okay, other members.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to ask if you can see the program, Chair.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you. Yeah, that's on. So, other members, you'll see that the program mainly deals with the question of finalizing the 3 bills that are in front of us, including the invitations of the stakeholders to comment Yeah, starting with the division of revenue bill, going to the appropriations amendment bill, special appropriation bill. So, honorable members, here's the program in front of you. With this today, we're dealing with the bills that is by National Treasury, the 2nd of November. Continue, Darren. Okay, honorable members, there is the proposed program for term 4. So can we move on the basis of this program? Mover.
Chair, it's Matafa. I'm in support of the program, and I move that the committee adopts the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Seconder. Chair,
it's Honorable Sarupin. I'll second the program.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. This is the program that we're adopting that takes care of this agenda item. Can we go to the next agenda item? Darren, any announcements?
Chairperson, no announcements from me. Our next meeting is next week, Tuesday, where we'll receive a briefing from FFC on the 3 bills, Chairperson, the 3 bills that were presented today by National Treasury.
Thank you, Darren. But I think we need to share with the oral members the status of our study tour. There's been a lot of development since our last meeting. Quickly. Darren?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if it's me or if it's you that's breaking up.
No, it's you. I was saying quickly share with the oral members the status of this of the study tour. Where are we? What's happening?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I did send an email last week, Chairperson, to indicate the status, but in summary, Singapore will be in recess in December. And then South Korea has confirmed that they will be able to host us during the first week of December. That is the 4th to the 9th of December, Chairperson. We are now in the process of waiting on the approval from the officers of the House Chairperson and the Chief Whip, because that first week of December falls during constituency period. So now we need to seek permission from the Chief Whip for us to travel abroad during that period. And yes, Chair, we are just waiting on that. And then that's it, Chairperson. Should anything else come up, I will inform the members either via email or at the next meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Darren. Honorable members, I think all systems go, but as you know, you need to go through these approvals. Having spoken with the House Chair, there seems to be no issues. Thank you very much for that. Any questions on this matter, oral members? No. Okay, thank you so much. Oral members, this takes us to the end of today's meeting. It was quite an informative meeting, a lot of issues coming up, and the issues that the oral members are raising, these are the issues that we should persist with when we interact with National Treasury and when the different departments and institutions come to us, as it will happen as we deal with the different bills. But thank you very much to you, oral members, everybody who's on the platform, our support staff. Thank you very much. Until we meet next week, Tuesday. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Out of here.
Thanks, Chair.